chapters 36 to 39 of Book 9 of History of Animals by Aristotle, translated by Darcy Wentworth Thompson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 36. Of hawks, the strongest is the buzzard. The next in point of courage is the merlin, and the circus ranks third. Other diverse kinds are the asterius, the pigeon hawk, and the paternus. The broader winged hawk is called the half buzzard. Others go by the name of hobby hawk, or sparrow hawk, or smooth feathered, or toad catcher. Birds of this latter species find their food with very little difficulty, and flutter along the ground. Some say that there are 10 species of hawks, all differing from one another. One hawk, they say, will strike and grab the pigeon as it rests on the ground, but never touch it while it is in flight. Another hawk attacks the pigeon when it is perched upon a tree or any elevation, but never touches it when it is on the ground or on the wing. Other hawks attack their prey only when it is on the wing. They say that pigeons can distinguish the various species, so that when a hawk is an assailant, if it be one that attacks its prey when the prey is on the wing, the pigeon will sit still. If it be one that attacks sitting prey, the pigeon will rise up and fly away. In Thrace, in the district sometimes called that of Kedripolis, men hunt for little birds in the marshes with the aid of hawks. The men with sticks in their hands go beating at the reeds and brushwood to frighten the birds out, and the hawks show themselves overhead and frighten them down. The men then strike them with their sticks and capture them. They give a portion of their booty to the hawks, that is, they throw some of the birds up in the air, and the hawks catch them. In the neighborhood of Lake Maeotis, it is said, wolves act in concert with the fishermen, and if the fishermen decline to share with them, they tear their nets in pieces as they lie drying on the shore of the lake. 37. So much for the habits of birds. In marine creatures also, one may observe many ingenious devices adapted to the circumstances of their lives. For the accounts commonly given of the so-called fishing frog are quite true, as are also those given of the torpedo. The fishing frog has a set of filaments that project in front of its eyes. They are long and thin like hairs, and are round at the tips. They lie on either side and are used as baits. Accordingly, when the animal stirs up a place full of sand and mud and conceals itself therein, it raises the filaments, and when the little fish strike against them, it draws them in underneath into its mouth. The torpedo narcotizes the creatures that it wants to catch, overpowering them by the power of shock that is resident in its body, and feeds upon them. It also hides in the sand and mud, and catches all the creatures that swim in its way, and come under its narcotizing influence. This phenomenon has been actually observed in operation. The stingray also conceals itself, but not exactly in the same way. That the creatures get their living by this means is obvious from the fact that whereas they are peculiarly inactive, they are often caught with mullets in their interior, the swiftest of fishes. Furthermore, the fishing frog is unusually thin when he is caught after losing the tips of his filaments, and the torpedo is known to cause a numbness even in human beings. Again, the hake, the ray, the flatfish, and the angelfish burrow in the sand, and after concealing themselves, angle with the filaments on their mouths. That fishermen call their fishing rods, and the little creatures on which they feed swim up to the filaments, taking them for bits of seaweed, such as they feed upon. Wherever an anthias fish is seen, there will be no dangerous creatures in the vicinity, and sponge divers will dive in security, and they call these signal fishes holy fish. It is a sort of perpetual coincidence, like the fact that wherever snails are present, you may be sure there is neither pig nor partridge in the neighbourhood, for both pig and partridge eat up the snails. The sea serpent resembles the conger in colour and shape, but is of lesser bulk, and more rapid in its movements. If it be caught and thrown away, it will bore a hole with its snout and burrow rapidly in the sand. Its snout, by the way, is sharper than that of ordinary serpents. The so-called sea scolopendra, after swallowing the hook, turns itself inside out until it ejects it, and then it again turns itself outside in. The sea scolopendra, like the land scolopendra, will come to a savoury bait. The creature does not bite with its teeth, but stings by contact with its entire body, like the so-called sea nettle. The so-called fox shark, when it finds it has swallowed the hook, tries to get rid of it as the scolopendra does, but not in the same way. In other words, it runs up the fishing line and bites it off short. It is caught in some districts in deep and rapid waters with night lines. The bonitos swarm together when they espy a dangerous creature, and the largest of them swim round it, and if it touches one of the shoal, they try to repel it. They have strong teeth. Amongst other large fish, a lamia shark, after falling in amongst a shoal, has been seen to be covered with wounds. Of river fish, the male of the sheatfish is remarkably attentive to the young. The female, after parturition, goes away. The male stays and keeps on guard where the spawn is most abundant, contenting himself with keeping off all other little fishes that might steal the spawn or fry, and this he does for 40 or 50 days, until the young are sufficiently grown to make away from the other fishes for themselves. The fisherman can tell where he is on guard, for in warding off the little fishes he makes a rush in the water and gives utterance to a kind of muttering noise. He is so earnest in the performance of his parental duties that the fisherman at times, if the eggs be attached to the roots of water plants deep in the water, drag them into as shallow a place as possible. The male fish will still keep by the young, and if it so happen, will be caught by the hook when snapping at the little fish that come by. If, however, he be sensible by experience of the danger of the hook, he will still keep by his charge, and with his extremely strong teeth will bite the hook in pieces. All fishes, both those that wander about and those that are stationary, occupy the districts where they were born or very similar places, for their natural food is found there. Carnivorous fish wander most, and all fish are carnivorous with the exception of a few, such as the mullet, the salp, the red mullet, and the calcus. The so-called pholis gives out a mucus discharge which envelops the creature in a kind of nest. Of shellfish and fish that are finless, the scallop moves with greatest force and to the greatest distance, impelled along by some internal energy. The murex or purple fish and others that resemble it move hardly at all. Out of the lagoon of Pyrrha, all the fishes swim in winter time, except the sea gudgeon. They swim out owing to the cold, for the narrow waters are colder than the outer sea, and on the return of the early summer they all swim back again. In the lagoon no scarus is found, nor thritta, nor any other species of the spiny fish, no spotted dogfish, no spiny dogfish, no sea crawfish, no octopus either of the common or the musky kinds, and certain other fish are also absent. But of fish that are found in the lagoon, the white gudgeon is not a marine fish. Of fishes, the oviparous are in their prime in the early summer until the spawning time, the viviparous in the autumn, as is also the case with the mullet, the red mullet, and all such fish. In the neighbourhood of Lesbos, the fishes of the outer sea or of the lagoon bring forth their eggs or young in the lagoon. Sexual union takes place in the autumn and parturition in the spring. With fishes of the cartilaginous kind, the males and females swarm together in the autumn for the sake of sexual union. In the early summer they come swimming in and keep apart until after parturition. The two sexes are often taken linked together in sexual union. Of mollusks, the sepia is the most cunning and is the only species that employs its dark liquid for the sake of concealment as well as from fear. The octopus and calamary make the discharge solely from fear. These creatures never discharge the pigment in its entirety, and after a discharge the pigment accumulates again. The sepia, as has been said, often uses its coloring pigment for concealment. It shows itself in front of the pigment and then retreats back into it. It also hunts with its long tentacles not only little fishes, but oftentimes even mullets. The octopus is a stupid creature, for it will approach a man's hand if it be lowered in the water. But it is neat and thrifty in its habits. That is, it lays up stores in its nest, and, after eating up all that is eatable, it ejects the shells and sheaths of crabs and shellfish, and the skeletons of little fishes. It seeks its prey by so changing its colour as to render it like the colour of the stones adjacent to it. It does so also when alarmed. By some, the sepia is said to perform the same trick, that is, they say it can change its colour so as to make it resemble the colour of its habitat. The only fish that can do this is the angelfish, that is, it can change its colour like the octopus. The octopus, as a rule, does not live the year out. It has a natural tendency to run off into liquid, for if beaten and squeezed, it keeps losing substance and at last disappears. The female, after parturition, is peculiarly subject to this colliquefaction. It becomes stupid. If tossed about by waves, it submits impassively. A man, if he dived, could catch it with the hand. It gets covered over with slime and makes no effort to catch its wonted prey. The male becomes leathery and clammy. As a proof that they do not live into a second year, there is the fact that, after the birth of the little octopuses in the late summer or beginning of autumn, it is seldom that a large-sized octopus is visible, whereas a little before this time of year the creature is at its largest. After the eggs are laid, they say that both the male and the female grow so old and feeble that they are preyed upon by little fish, and with ease dragged from their holes, and that this could not have been done previously. They say also that this is not the case with the small and young octopus, but that the young creature is much stronger than the grown-up one. Neither does the sepia live into a second year. The octopus is the only mollusk that ventures on to dry land. It walks by preference on rough ground. It is firm all over when you squeeze it, excepting in the neck. So much for the mollusca. It is also said that they make a thin, rough shell about them, like a hard sheath, and that this is made larger and larger as the animal grows larger, and that it comes out of the sheath as though out of a den or dwelling place. The nautilus or argonaut is a pulp or octopus, but one peculiar both in its nature and its habits. It rises up from deep water and swims on the surface. It rises with its shell downturned in order that it may rise the more easily and swim with it empty, but after reaching the surface it shifts the position of the shell. In between its feelers it has a certain amount of web growth, resembling the substance between the toes of web-footed birds, only that with these latter the substance is thick, while with the nautilus it is thin and like a spider's web. It uses this structure when a breeze is blowing, for a sail, and lets down some of its feelers alongside as rudder oars. If it be frightened, it fills its shell with water and sinks. With regard to the mode of generation and the growth of the shell, knowledge from observation is not yet satisfactory. The shell, however, does not appear to be there from the beginning, but to grow in their case as in that of other shellfish. Neither is it ascertained for certain whether the animal can live when stripped of the shell. 38. Of all insects, one may also say of all living creatures, the most industrious are the ant, the bee, the hornet, the wasp, and in point of fact all creatures akin to these. Of spiders, some are more skilful and more resourceful than others. The way in which ants work is open to ordinary observation. How they all march one after the other when they are engaged in putting away and storing up their food. All this may be seen, for they carry on their work even during bright moonlight nights. 39. Of spiders and phalangia there are many species. Of the venomous phalangia there are two. One that resembles the so-called wolf spider, small, speckled, and tapering to a point. It moves with leaps, from which habit it is nicknamed the flea. The other kind is large, black in color with long front legs. It is heavy in its movements, walks slowly, is not very strong, and never leaps. Of all the other species wherewith poison vendors supply themselves, some give a weak bite, and others never bite at all. There is another kind, comprising the so-called wolf spiders. Of these spiders, the small one weaves no web, and the large weaves a rude and poorly built one on the ground or on dry stone walls. It always builds its web over hollow places, inside of which it keeps a watch on the end threads, until some creature gets into the web and begins to struggle, when out the spider pounces. The speckled kind makes a little shabby web under trees. There is a third species of this animal, preeminently clever and artistic. It first weaves a thread stretching to all the exterior ends of the future web. Then, from the center, which it hits upon with great accuracy, it stretches the warp. On the warp it puts what corresponds to the woof, and then weaves the whole together. It sleeps and stores its food away from the center, but it is at the center that it keeps watch for its prey. Then, when any creature touches the web and the center is set in motion, it first ties and wraps the creature round with threads until it renders it helpless, then lifts it and carries it off, and if it happens to be hungry, sucks out the life juices, for that is the way it feeds. But if it be not hungry, it first mends any damage done, and then hastens again to its quest of prey. If something comes meanwhile into the net, the spider at first makes for the center, and then goes back to its entangled prey, as from a fixed starting point. If anyone injures a portion of the web, it recommences weaving at sunrise or at sunset, because it is chiefly at these periods that creatures are caught in the web. It is the female that does the weaving and the hunting, but the male takes a share of the booty captured. Of the skilful spiders weaving a substantial web, there are two kinds, the larger and the smaller. The one has long legs and keeps watch while swinging downwards from the web. From its large size, it cannot easily conceal itself, and so it keeps underneath, so that its prey may not be frightened off. but may strike upon the web's upper surface. The less awkwardly formed one lies in wait on the top, using a little hole for a lurking place. Spiders can spin webs from the time of their birth, not from their interior, as a superfluity or excretion, as Democritus avers, but off their body as a kind of tree bark, like the creatures that shoot out with their hair, as for instance the porcupine. The creature can attack animals larger than itself and enwrap them with its threads. In other words, it will attack a small lizard, run round and draw threads about its mouth until it closes the mouth up. Then it comes up and bites it. End of chapter 39. Chapter 40 of Book 9 of History of Animals by Aristotle. Translated by Darcy Wentworth Thompson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 40. So much for the spider. Of insects, there is a genus that has no one name, that comprehends all the species, though all the species are akin to one another in form. It consists of all the insects that construct a honeycomb, to wit, the bee, and all the insects that resemble it in form. There are 9 varieties, of which 6 are gregarious: the bee, the king bee, the drone bee, the annual wasp, and furthermore the anthrene or hornet, and the tenthredo or ground wasp. 3 are solitary: the smaller siren, of a dun colour, the larger siren, black and speckled, and the third, the largest of all, that is called the humble bee. Now, ants never go a-hunting, but gather up what is ready to hand. The spider makes nothing and lays up no store, but simply goes a-hunting for its food, while the bee, for we shall by and by treat of the 9 varieties, does not go a-hunting, but constructs its food out of gathered material and stores it away, for honey is the bee's food. This fact is shown by the beekeeper's attempt to remove the combs, for the bees, when they are fumigated and are suffering great distress from the process, then devour the honey most ravenously, whereas at other times they are never observed to be so greedy, but apparently are thrifty and disposed to lay by for their future sustenance. They have also another food which is called bee bread. This is scarcer than honey, and has a sweet fig-like taste. This they carry as they do the wax on their legs. Very remarkable diversity is observed in their methods of working and their general habits. When the hive has been delivered to them clean and empty, they build their waxen cells, bringing in the juice of all kinds of flowers and the tears or exuding sap of trees, such as willows and elms, and such others as are particularly given to the exudation of gum. With this material they besmear the groundwork, to provide against attacks of other creatures. The beekeepers call this stuff stopwax. They also, with the same material, narrow by side building the entrances to the hive if they are too wide. They first build cells for themselves, then for the so-called kings and the drones. For themselves they are always building, for the kings only when the brood of young is numerous, and cells for the drones they build if a superabundance of honey should suggest their doing so. They build the royal cells next to their own, and they are of small bulk. The drones' cells they build nearby, and these latter are less in bulk than the bee cells. They begin building the combs downwards from the top of the hive, and go down and down, building many combs connected together until they reach the bottom. The cells, both those for the honey and those also for the grubs, are double-doored, for 2 cells are ranged about a single base, one pointing one way and one the other, after the manner of a double or hourglass-shaped goblet. The cells that lie at the commencement of the combs and are attached to the hives, to the extent of 2 or 3 concentric circular rows, are small and devoid of honey. The cells that are well filled with honey are most thoroughly luted with wax. At the entry to the hive, the aperture of the doorway is smeared with mittus. This substance is a deep black, and is a sort of dross or residual by-product of wax. It has a pungent odor and is a cure for bruises and suppurating sores. The greasy stuff that comes next is pitch wax. It has a less pungent odor and is less medicinal than the mittus. Some say that the drones construct combs by themselves in the same hive and in the same comb that they share with the bees, but that they make no honey, but subsist, they and their grubs also, on the honey made by the bees. The drones, as a rule, keep inside the hive. When they go out of doors, they soar up in the air in a stream, whirling round and round in a kind of gymnastic exercise. When this is over, they come inside the hive and feed to repletion ravenously. The kings never quit the hive, except in conjunction with the entire swarm, either for food or for any other reason. They say that if a young swarm go astray, it will turn back upon its route, and by the aid of scent seek out its leader. It is said that if he is unable to fly, he is carried by the swarm, and that if he dies, the swarm perishes. And that if this swarm outlives the king for a while and constructs combs, no honey is produced, and the bees soon die out. Bees scramble up the stalks of flowers and rapidly gather the beeswax with their front legs. The front legs wipe it off on to the middle legs, and these pass it on to the hollow curves of the hind legs. When thus laden, they fly away home, and one may see plainly that their load is a heavy one. On each expedition the bee does not fly from a flower of one kind to a flower of another, but flies from one violet, say, to another violet, and never meddles with another flower until it has got back to the hive. On reaching the hive, they throw off their load, and each bee on his return is accompanied by 3 or 4 companions. One cannot well tell what is the substance they gather, nor the exact process of their work. Their mode of gathering wax has been observed on olive trees, as owing to the thickness of the leaves, the bees remain stationary for a considerable while. After this work is over, they attend to the grubs. There is nothing to prevent grubs, honey, and drones being all found in one and the same comb. As long as the leader is alive, the drones are said to be produced apart by themselves. If he be no longer living, they are said to be reared by the bees in their own cells, and under these circumstances to become more spirited. For this reason they are called sting drones, not that they really have stings, but that they have the wish without the power to use such weapons. The cells for the drones are larger than the others. Sometimes the bees construct cells for the drones apart, but usually they put them in amongst their own. And when this is the case, the beekeepers cut the drone cells out of the combs. There are several species of bees, as has been said. 2 of kings, the better kind red, the other black and variegated, and twice as big as the working bee. The best working bee is small, round, and speckled. Another kind is long and like an anthrine wasp. Another kind is what is called the robber bee, black and flat-bellied. Then there is the drone, the largest of all, but devoid of sting and lazy. There is a difference between the progeny of bees that inhabit cultivated land and of those from the mountains. The forest bees are more shaggy, smaller, more industrious and more fierce. Working bees make their combs all even, with the superficial covering quite smooth. Each comb is of one kind only, that is, it contains either bees only, or grubs only, or drones only. If it happen, however, that they make in one and the same comb all these kinds of cells, each separate kind will be built in a continuous row right through. The long bees build uneven combs, with the lids of the cells protuberant, like those of the anthrene. Grubs and everything else have no fixed places, but are put anywhere. From these bees come inferior kings, a large quantity of drones, and the so-called robber bee. They produce either no honey at all, or honey in very small quantities. Bees brood over the combs and so mature them. If they fail to do so, the combs are said to go bad and to get covered with a sort of spider's web. If they can keep brooding over the part undamaged, the damaged part simply eats itself away. If they cannot so brood, the entire comb perishes. In the damaged combs, small worms are engendered, which take on wings and fly away. When the combs keep settling down, the bees restore the level surface and put props underneath the combs to give themselves free passage room. For if such free passage be lacking, they cannot brood, and the cobwebs come on. When the robber bee and the drone appear, not only do they do no work themselves, but they actually damage the work of the other bees. If they are caught in the act, they are killed by the working bees. These bees also kill without mercy most of their kings, and especially kings of the inferior sort. And this they do for fear a multiplicity of kings should lead to a dismemberment of the hive. They kill them especially when the hive is deficient in grubs, and a swarm is not intended to take place. Under these circumstances, they destroy the cells of the kings, if they have been prepared, on the ground that these kings are always ready to lead out swarms. They destroy also the combs of the drones, if a failure in the honey supply be threatening, and the hive runs short of provisions. Under such circumstances, they fight desperately with all who try to take their honey, and eject from the hive all the resident drones, and oftentimes the drones are to be seen sitting apart in the hive. The little bees fight vigorously with the long kind, and try to banish them from the hives. If they succeed, the hive will be unusually productive, but if the bigger bees get left mistresses of the field, they pass the time in idleness, and do no good at all but die out before the autumn. Whenever the working bees kill an enemy, they try to do so out of doors. And whenever one of their own body dies, they carry the dead bee out of doors also. The so-called robber bees spoil their own combs, and if they can do so unnoticed, enter and spoil the combs of other bees. If they are caught in the act, they are put to death. It is no easy task for them to escape detection, for there are sentinels on guard at every entry, and even if they do escape detection on entering, afterwards from a surfeit of food they cannot fly, but go rolling about in front of the hive, so that their chances of escape are small indeed. The kings are never themselves seen outside the hive, except with a swarm in flight, during which time all the other bees cluster around them. When the flight of a swarm is imminent, a monotonous and quite peculiar sound made by all the bees is heard for several days, and for 2 or 3 days in advance a few bees are seen flying round the hive. It has never as yet been ascertained, owing to the difficulty of the observation, whether or no the king is among these. When they have swarmed, they fly away and separate off to each of the kings. If a small swarm happens to settle near to a large one, it will shift to join this large one, and if the king whom they have abandoned follows them, they put him to death. So much for the quitting of the hive and the swarm flight. Separate detachments of bees are told off for diverse operations. That is, some carry flower produce, others carry water, others smooth and arrange the combs. A bee carries water when it is rearing grubs. No bee ever settles on the flesh of any creature, or ever eats animal food. They have no fixed date for commencing work, but when their provender is forthcoming, and they are in comfortable trim, and by preference in summer, they set to work, and when the weather is fine they work incessantly. The bee, when quite young, and in fact only 3 days old, after shedding its chrysalis case, begins to work if it be well fed. When a swarm is settling, some bees detach themselves in search of food and return back to the swarm. In hives that are in good condition, the production of young bees is discontinued only for the 40 days that follow the winter solstice. When the grubs are grown, the bees put food beside them and cover them with a coating of wax, and as soon as the grub is strong enough, he of his own accord breaks the lid and comes out. Creatures that make their appearance in hives and spoil the combs, the working bees clear out. But the other bees, from sheer laziness, look with indifference on damage done to their produce. When the bee masters take out the combs, they leave enough food behind for winter use. If it be sufficient in quantity, the occupants of the hive will survive. If it be insufficient, then, if the weather be rough, they die on the spot. But if it be fair, they fly away and desert the hive. They feed on honey summer and winter, but they store up another article of food resembling wax in hardness, which by some is called sandarake or bee bread. Their worst enemies are wasps and the birds named titmice, and furthermore the swallow and the bee-eater. The frogs in the marsh also catch them if they come in their way by the water side, and for this reason beekeepers chase the frogs from the ponds from which the bees take water. They destroy also wasps' nests and the nests of swallows in the neighbourhood of the hives, and also the nests of bee-eaters. Bees have fear only of one another. They fight with one another and with wasps. Away from the hive they attack neither their own species nor any other creature, but in the close proximity of the hive they kill whatever they get hold of. Bees that sting die from their inability to extract the sting, without at the same time extracting their intestines. True, they often recover if the person stung takes the trouble to press the sting out, but once it loses its sting, the bee must die. They can kill with their stings, even large animals. In fact, a horse has been known to have been stung to death by them. The kings are the least disposed to show anger or to inflict a sting. Bees that die are removed from the hive, and in every way the creature is remarkable for its cleanly habits. In point of fact, they often fly away to a distance to avoid their excrement because it is malodorous, and, as has been said, they are annoyed by all bad smells, and by the scent of perfumes, so much so that they sting people that use perfumes. They perish from a number of accidental causes, and when their kings become too numerous and try each to carry away a portion of the swarm. The toad also feeds on bees. He comes to the doorway of the hive, puffs himself out as he sits on the watch, and devours the creatures as they come flying out. The bees can in no way retaliate, but the beekeeper makes a point of killing him. As for the class of bee that has been spoken of as inferior or good for nothing, and as constructing its combs so roughly, some beekeepers say that it is the young bees that act so from inexperience, and the bees of the current year are termed young. The young bees do not sting as the others do, and it is for this reason that swarms may be safely carried, as it is of young bees that they are composed. When honey runs short, they expel the drones, and the beekeepers supply the bees with figs and sweet-tasting articles of food. The elder bees do the indoor work and are rough and hairy from staying indoors. The young bees do the outer carrying and are comparatively smooth. They kill the drones also when in their work they are confined for room. The drones, by the way, live in the innermost recess of the hive. On one occasion, when a hive was in a poor condition, some of the occupants assailed a foreign hive. Proving victorious in a combat, they took to carrying off the honey. When the beekeeper tried to kill them, the other bees came out and tried to beat off the enemy, but made no attempt to sting the man. The diseases that chiefly attack prosperous hives are, first of all, the clarus. This consists in a growth of little worms on the floor, from which, as they develop, a kind of cobweb grows over the entire hive, and the combs decay. Another diseased condition is indicated in a lassitude on the part of the bees, and in malodorousness of the hive. Bees feed on thyme, and the white thyme is better than the red. In summer the place for the hive should be cool, and in winter warm. They are very apt to fall sick if the plant they are at work on be mildewed. In a high wind they carry a stone by way of ballast to steady them. If a stream be near at hand, they drink from it, and from it only, but before they drink, they first deposit their load. If there be no water near at hand, they disgorge their honey as they drink elsewhere, and at once make off to work. There are 2 seasons for making honey, spring and autumn. The spring honey is sweeter, whiter, and in every way better than the autumn honey. Superior honey comes from fresh comb, and from young shoots. The red honey is inferior, and owes its inferiority to the comb in which it is deposited, just as wine is apt to be spoiled by its cask. Consequently, one should have it looked to and dried. When the thyme is in flower and the comb is full, the honey does not harden. The honey that is golden in hue is excellent. White honey does not come from thyme pure and simple. It is good as a salve for sore eyes and wounds. Poor honey always floats on the surface and should be skimmed off. The fine, clear honey rests below. When the floral world is in full bloom, then they make wax. Consequently, you must then take the wax out of the hive, for they go to work on new wax at once. The flowers from which they gather honey are as follows: the spindle tree, the melilot clover, king's spear, myrtle, flowering reed, withy, and broom. When they work at thyme, they mix in water before sealing up the comb. As has been already stated, they all either fly to a distance to discharge their excrement, or make the discharge into one single comb. The little bees, as has been said, are more industrious than the big ones. Their wings are battered, their colour is black, and they have a burnt-up aspect. Gaudy and showy bees, like gaudy and showy women, are good-for-nothings. Bees seem to take a pleasure in listening to a rattling noise, and consequently men say that they can muster them into a hive by rattling with crockery or stones. It is uncertain, however, whether or no they can hear the noise at all, and also whether their procedure is due to pleasure or alarm. They expel from the hive all idlers and unthrifts. As has been said, they differentiate their work. Some make wax, some make honey, some make bee bread, some shape and mold combs, some bring water to the cells and mingle it with the honey, some engage in out-of-door work. At early dawn they make no noise, until some one particular bee makes a buzzing noise 2 or 3 times, and thereby awakes the rest. Hereupon they all fly in a body to work. By and by they return, and at first are noisy. Then the noise gradually decreases, until at last some one bee flies round about, making a buzzing noise, and apparently calling on the others to go to sleep. Then, all of a sudden, there is a dead silence. The hive is known to be in good condition if the noise heard within it is loud, and if the bees make a flutter as they go out and in, for at this time they are constructing brood cells. They suffer most from hunger when they recommence work after winter. They become somewhat lazy if the beekeeper, in robbing the hive, leave behind too much honey. Still, one should leave cells numerous in proportion to the population, for the bees work in a spiritless way if too few combs are left. They become idle also, as being dispirited if the hive be too big. A hive yields to the beekeeper 6 or 9 pints of honey. A prosperous hive will yield 12 or 15 pints. Exceptionally good hives, 18. Sheep, and as has been said, wasps are enemies to the bees. Beekeepers entrap the latter by putting a flat dish on the ground with pieces of meat on it. When a number of the wasps settle on it, they cover them with a lid and put the dish and its contents on the fire. It is a good thing to have a few drones in a hive, as their presence increases the industry of the workers. Bees can tell the approach of rough weather or of rain, and the proof is that they will not fly away, but even while it is as yet fine, they go fluttering about within a restricted space, and the beekeeper knows from this that they are expecting bad weather. When the bees inside the hive hang clustering to one another, it is a sign that the swarm is intending to quit. Consequently, beekeepers, on seeing this, besprinkle the hive with sweet wine. It is advisable to plant about the hive pear trees, beans, median grass, Syrian grass, yellow pulse, myrtle, poppies, creeping thyme, and almond trees. Some beekeepers sprinkle their bees with flour and can distinguish them from others when they are at work out of doors. If the spring be late, or if there be drought or blight, then grubs are all the fewer in the hives. So much for the habits of bees. End of chapter 40. Chapters 41 to 46 of Book 9 of History of Animals by Aristotle, translated by Darcy Wentworth Thompson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 41. Of wasps there are 2 kinds. Of these kinds one is wild and scarce, lives on the mountains, engenders grubs, not underground, but on oak trees, is larger, longer, and blacker than the other kind, is invariably speckled and furnished with a sting, and is remarkably courageous. The pain from its sting is more severe than that caused by the others, for the instrument that causes the pain is larger in proportion to its own larger size. These wild wasps live over into a 2nd year, and in winter time, when oaks have been in course of felling, they may be seen coming out and flying away. They lie concealed during the winter, and live in the interior of logs of wood. Some of them are mother wasps, and some are workers, as with the tamer kind. But it is by observation of the tame wasps that one may learn the varied characteristics of the mothers and the workers. For in the case of the tame wasps also there are 2 kinds. One consists of leaders, who are called mothers, and the other of workers. The leaders are far larger and milder tempered than the others. The workers do not live over into a second year, but all die when winter comes on. And this can be proved, for at the commencement of winter the workers become drowsy, and about the time of the winter solstice they are never seen at all. The leaders, the so-called mothers, are seen all through the winter, and live in holes underground. For men, when ploughing or digging in winter, have often come upon mother wasps, but never upon workers. The mode of reproduction of wasps is as follows. At the approach of summer, when the leaders have found a sheltered spot, they take to moulding their combs, and construct the so-called sphaecons, little nests containing 4 cells, or thereabouts, and in these are produced working wasps, but not mothers. When these are grown up, then they construct other larger combs upon the first, and then again in like manner others, so that by the close of autumn there are numerous large combs, in which the leader, the so-called mother, engenders no longer working wasps, but mothers. These develop high up in the nest as large grubs, in cells that occur in groups of 4 or rather more, pretty much in the same way as we have seen the grubs of the king bees to be produced in their cells. After the birth of the working grubs in the cells, the leaders do nothing, and the workers have to supply them with nourishment. And this is inferred from the fact that the leaders of the working wasps no longer fly out at this time, but rest quietly indoors. Whether the leaders of last year, after engendering new leaders, are killed by the new brood, and whether this occurs invariably, or whether they can live for a longer time, has not been ascertained by actual observation. Neither can we speak with certainty, as from observation, as to the age attained by the mother wasp, or by the wild wasps, or as to any other similar phenomenon. The mother wasp is broad and heavy, fatter and larger than the ordinary wasp, and from its weight not very strong on the wing. These wasps cannot fly far, and for this reason they always rest inside the nest, building and managing its indoor arrangements. The so-called mother wasps are found in most of the nests. It is a matter of doubt whether or no they are provided with stings. In all probability, like the king bees, they have stings, but never protrude them for offense. Of the ordinary wasps, some are destitute of stings, like the drone bees, and some are provided with them. Those unprovided therewith are smaller and less spirited and never fight, while the others are big and courageous, and these latter by some are called males, and the stingless females. At the approach of winter, many of the wasps that have stings appear to lose them, but we have never met an eyewitness of this phenomenon. Wasps are more abundant in times of drought and in wild localities. They live underground. Their combs they mould out of chips and earth, each comb from a single origin, like a kind of root. They feed on certain flowers and fruits, but for the most part on animal food. Some of the tame wasps have been observed when sexually united, but it was not determined whether both or neither had stings, or whether one had a sting and the other had not. Wild wasps have been seen under similar circumstances when one was seen to have a sting, but the case of the other was left undetermined. The wasp grub does not appear to come into existence by parturition, for at the outset the grub is too big to be the offspring of a wasp. If you take a wasp by the feet and let him buzz with vibration of his wings, wasps that have no stings will fly towards it, and wasps that have stings will not. From which fact it is inferred by some that one set are males and the other females. In holes in the ground in winter time, wasps are found, some with stings and some without. Some build cells, small and few in number, others build many and large ones. The so-called mothers are caught at the change of season, mostly on elm trees, while gathering a substance sticky and gum-like. A large number of mother wasps are found when, in the previous year, wasps have been numerous and the weather rainy. They are captured in precipitous places or in vertical clefts in the ground, and they all appear to be furnished with stings. 42. So much for the habits of wasps. Anthrae do not subsist by culling from flowers as bees do, but for the most part on animal food. For this reason they hover about dung, for they chase the large flies, and after catching them lop off their heads and fly away with the rest of the carcasses. They are furthermore fond of sweet fruits. Such is their food. They have also kings or leaders like bees and wasps, and their leaders are larger in proportion to themselves than are wasp kings to wasps or bee kings to bees. The Anthrena king, like the wasp king, lives indoors. Anthrae build their nests underground, scraping out the soil like ants, for neither Anthrae nor wasps go off in swarms as bees do, but successive layers of young Anthrae keep to the same habitat and go on enlarging their nest by scraping out more and more of soil. The nest accordingly attains a great size. In fact, from a particularly prosperous nest have been removed 3 and even 4 baskets full of combs. They do not, like bees, store up food, but pass the winter in a torpid condition. The greater part of them die in the winter, but it is uncertain whether that can be said of them all. In the hives of bees, several kings are found, and they lead off detachments in swarms, but in the Anthrena's nest only one king is found. When individual Anthrae have strayed from their nest, they cluster on a tree and construct combs, as may be often seen above ground, and in this nest they produce a king. When the king is full grown, he leads them away and settles them along with himself in a hive or nest. With regard to their sexual unions and the method of their reproduction, nothing is known from actual observation. Among bees, both the drones and the kings are stingless, and so are certain wasps, as has been said. But Anthrae appear to be all furnished with stings, though, by the way, it would well be worth while to carry out investigation as to whether the Anthrena king has a sting or not. 43. Humble bees produce their young under a stone, right on the ground, in a couple of cells or little more. In these cells is found an attempt at honey, of a poor description. The tenthredon is like the anthrena, but speckled and about as broad as a bee. Being epicures as to their food, they fly one at a time into kitchens, and onto slices of fish and the like dainties. The tenthredon brings forth like the wasp underground, and is very prolific. Its nest is much bigger and longer than that of the wasp. So much for the methods of working and the habits of life of the bee, the wasp, and all the other similar insects. 44. As regards the disposition or temper of animals, as has been previously observed, one may detect great differences in respect to courage and timidity, as also, even among wild animals, in regard to tameness and wildness. The lion, while he is eating, is most ferocious, but when he is not hungry and has had a good meal, he is quite gentle. He is totally devoid of suspicion or nervous fear, is fond of romping with animals that have been reared along with him and to whom he is accustomed, and manifests great affection towards them. In the chase, as long as he is in view, he makes no attempt to run and shows no fear. But even if he be compelled by the multitude of the hunters to retreat, he withdraws deliberately, step by step, every now and then turning his head to regard his pursuers. If, however, he reach wooded cover, then he runs at full speed, until he comes to open ground, when he resumes his leisurely retreat. When in the open, he is forced by the number of the hunters to run while in full view. He does run at the top of his speed, but without leaping and bounding. This running of his is evenly and continuously kept up like the running of a dog, but when he is in pursuit of his prey and is close behind, he makes a sudden pounce upon it. The two statements made regarding him are quite true. The one, that he is especially afraid of fire, as Homer pictures him in the line, "And glowing torches, which, though fierce, he dreads." And the other, that he keeps a steady eye upon the hunter who hits him and flings himself upon him. If a hunter hit him without hurting him, then, if with a bound he gets hold of him, he will do him no harm, not even with his claws, but after shaking him and giving him a fright, will let him go again. They invade the cattle folds and attack human beings when they are grown old, and so, by reason of old age and the diseased condition of their teeth, are unable to pursue their wonted prey. They live to a good old age. The lion, who was captured when lame, had a number of his teeth broken, which fact was regarded by some as a proof of the longevity of lions, as he could hardly have been reduced to this condition except at an advanced age. There are two species of lions, the plump, curly-maned, and the long-bodied, straight-maned. The latter kind is courageous, and the former comparatively timid. Sometimes they run away with their tail between their legs, like a dog. A lion was once seen to be on the point of attacking a boar, but to run away when the boar stiffened his bristles in defense. It is susceptible of hurt from a wound in the flank, but on any other part of its frame will endure any number of blows, and its head is especially hard. Whenever it inflicts a wound either by its teeth or its claws, there flows from the wounded parts suppurating matter, quite yellow and not to be staunched by bandage or a sponge. The treatment for such a wound is the same as that for the bite of a dog. The thos or civet is fond of man's company. It does him no harm, and is not much afraid of him. But it is an enemy to the dog and the lion, and consequently is not found in the same habitat with them. The little ones are the best. Some say that there are two species of the animal, and some say three. There are probably not more than three, but as is the case with certain of the fishes, birds, and quadrupeds, this animal changes in appearance with the change of season. His color in winter is not the same as it is in summer. In summer the animal is smooth-haired. In winter he is clothed in fur. 45. The bison is found in Paeonia on Mount Messapium, which separates Paeonia from Mydeca, and the Paeonians call it the monopus. It is the size of a bull, but stouter in build and not long in the body. Its skin, stretched tight on a frame, would give sitting room for 7 people. In general, it resembles the ox in appearance, except that it has a mane that reaches down to the point of the shoulder, as that of the horse reaches down to its withers. But the hair in its mane is softer than the hair in the horse's mane, and clings more closely. The color of the hair is brown-yellow. The mane reaches down to the eyes, and is deep and thick. The color of the body is half red, half ashen-gray, like that of the so-called chestnut horse, but rougher. It has an undercoat of woolly hair. The animal is not found either very black or very red. It has the bellow of a bull. Its horns are crooked, turned inwards towards each other, and useless for purposes of self-defense. They are a span broad, or a little more, and in volume each horn would hold about 3 pints of liquid. The black color of the horn is beautiful and bright. The tuft of hair on the forehead reaches down to the eyes, so that the animal sees objects on either flank better than objects right in front. It has no upper teeth, as is the case also with kine and all other horned animals. Its legs are hairy. It is cloven-footed, and the tail, which resembles that of the ox, seems not big enough for the size of its body. It tosses up dust and scoops out the ground with its hooves, like the bull. Its skin is impervious to blows. Owing to the savour of its flesh, it is sought for in the chase. When it is wounded, it runs away, and stops only when thoroughly exhausted. It defends itself against an assailant by kicking and projecting its excrement to a distance of 8 yards. This device it can easily adopt over and over again, and the excrement is so pungent that the hair of hunting dogs is burnt off by it. It is only when the animal is disturbed or alarmed that the dung has this property. When the animal is undisturbed, it has no blistering effect. So much for the shape and habits of the animal. When the season comes for parturition, the mothers give birth to their young in troops upon the mountains. Before dropping their young, they scatter their dung in all directions, making a kind of circular rampart around them. For the animal has the faculty of ejecting excrement in most extraordinary quantities. 46. Of all wild animals, the most easily tamed and the gentlest is the elephant. It can be taught a number of tricks, the drift and meaning of which it understands. As, for instance, it can be taught to kneel in presence of the king. It is very sensitive and possessed of an intelligence superior to that of other animals. When the male has had sexual union with the female, and the female has conceived, the male has no further intercourse with her. Some say that the elephant lives for 200 years, others for 120, that the female lives nearly as long as the male, that they reach their prime about the age of 60, and that they are sensitive to inclement weather and frost. The elephant is found by the banks of rivers, but he is not a river animal. He can make his way through water as long as the tip of his trunk can be above the surface, for he blows with his trunk and breathes through it. The animal is a poor swimmer owing to the heavy weight of his body. End of chapter 46. Chapters 47 to 49b of History of Animals by Aristotle. Translated by Darcy Wentworth Thompson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 47. The male camel declines intercourse with its mother. If his keeper tries compulsion, he evinces disinclination. On one occasion, when intercourse was being declined by the young male, the keeper covered over the mother and put the young male to her. But when after the intercourse the wrapping had been removed, though the operation was completed and could not be revoked, still by and by he bit his keeper to death. A story goes that the king of Scythia had a highly bred mare, and that all her foals were splendid, that wishing to mate the best of the young males with the mother, he had him brought to the stall for the purpose, that the young horse declined, that after the mother's head had been concealed in a wrapper, he in ignorance had intercourse, and that when immediately afterwards the wrapper was removed, and the head of the mare was rendered visible, the young horse ran away and hurled himself down a precipice. 48. Among the sea fishes, many stories are told about the dolphin, indicative of his gentle and kindly nature, and of manifestations of passionate attachment to boys in and about Tarentum, Caria, and other places. The story goes that after a dolphin had been caught and wounded off the coast of Caria, a shoal of dolphins came into the harbor and stopped there until the fisherman let his captive go free, whereupon the shoal departed. A shoal of young dolphins is always, by way of protection, followed by a large one. On one occasion a shoal of dolphins, large and small, was seen, and two dolphins at a little distance appeared swimming in underneath a little dead dolphin when it was sinking, and supporting it on their backs, trying out of compassion to prevent its being devoured by some predaceous fish. Incredible stories are told regarding the rapidity of movement of this creature. It appears to be the fleetest of all animals, marine and terrestrial, and it can leap over the masts of large vessels. This speed is chiefly manifested when they are pursuing a fish for food. Then, if the fish endeavors to escape, they pursue him in their ravenous hunger down to deep waters. But when the necessary return swim is getting too long, they hold in their breath, as though calculating the length of it, and then draw themselves together for an effort, and shoot up like arrows, trying to make the long ascent rapidly, in order to breathe. And in the effort they spring right over a ship's masts, if a ship be in the vicinity. This same phenomenon is observed in divers, when they have plunged into deep water. That is, they pull themselves together and rise with a speed proportional to their strength. Dolphins live together in pairs, male and female. It is not known for what reason they run themselves aground on dry land. At all events, it is said that they do so at times, and for no obvious reason. 49. Just as with all animals a change of action follows a change of circumstance, so also a change of character follows a change of action. And often some portions of the physical frame undergo a change, as occurs in the case of birds. Hens, for instance, when they have beaten the cock in a fight, will crow like the cock and endeavour to tread him. The crest rises up on their head, and the tail feathers on the rump, so that it becomes difficult to recognize that they are hens. In some cases there is a growth of small spurs. On the death of a hen, a cock has been seen to undertake the maternal duties, leading the chickens about and providing them with food, and so intent upon these duties as to cease crowing and indulging his sexual propensities. Some cock birds are congenitally so feminine that they will submit patiently to other males who attempt to tread them. 50. Some animals change their form and character, not only at certain ages and at certain seasons, but in consequence of being castrated, and all animals possessed of testicles may be submitted to this operation. Birds have their testicles inside, and oviparous quadrupeds close to the loins, and of viviparous animals that walk, some have them inside, and most have them outside, but all have them at the lower end of the belly. Birds are castrated at the rump, at the part where the two sexes unite in copulation. If you burn this twice or thrice with hot irons, then, if the bird be full grown, his crest grows sallow, he ceases to crow, and forgoes sexual passion. But if you cauterize the bird when young, none of these male attributes or propensities will come to him as he grows up. The case is the same with men. If you mutilate them in boyhood, the latter growing hair never comes, and the voice never changes, but remains high-pitched. If they be mutilated in early manhood, the late growths of hair quit them, except the growth on the groin, and that diminishes but does not entirely depart. The congenital growths of hair never fall out, for a eunuch never grows bald. In the case of all castrated or mutilated male quadrupeds, the voice changes to the feminine voice. All other quadrupeds, when castrated, unless the operation be performed when they are young, invariably die. But in the case of boars, and in their case only, the age at which the operation is performed produces no difference. All animals, if operated on when they are young, become bigger and better looking than their unmutilated fellows. If they be mutilated when full grown, they do not take on any increase of size. If stags be mutilated when, by reason of their age, they have as yet no horns, they never grow horns at all. If they be mutilated when they have horns, the horns remain unchanged in size, and the animal does not lose them. Calves are mutilated when a year old. Otherwise, they turn out uglier and smaller. Steers are mutilated in the following way. They turn the animal over on its back, cut a little off the scrotum at the lower end, and squeeze out the testicles, then push back the roots of them as far as they can, and stop up the incision with hair to give an outlet to suppurating matter. If inflammation ensues, they cauterize the scrotum and put on a plaster. If a full-grown bull be mutilated, he can still, to all appearance, unite sexually with the cow. The ovaries of sows are excised with the view of quenching in them sexual appetites and of stimulating growth in size and fatness. The sow has first to be kept 2 days without food, and after being hung up by the hind legs, it is operated on. They cut the lower belly about the place where the boars have their testicles, for it is there that the ovary grows, adhering to the 2 divisions or horns of the womb. They cut off a little piece and stitch up the incision. Female camels are mutilated when they are wanted for war purposes, and are mutilated to prevent their being got with young. Some of the inhabitants of Upper Asia have as many as 3,000 camels. When they run in consequence of the length of their stride, much quicker than the horses of Nisaea. As a general rule, mutilated animals grow to a greater length than the unmutilated. All animals that ruminate derive profit and pleasure from the process of rumination, as they do from the process of eating. It is the animals that lack the upper teeth that ruminate, such as kine, sheep, and goats. In the case of wild animals, no observation has been possible, save in the case of animals that are occasionally domesticated, such as the stag, and it, we know, chews the cud. All animals that ruminate generally do so when lying down on the ground. They carry on the process to the greatest extent in winter, and stall-fed ruminants carry it on for about 7 months in the year. Beasts that go in herds, as they get their food out of doors, ruminate to a lesser degree and over a lesser period. Some also of the animals that have teeth in both jaws ruminate, as for instance the pontic mice, and the fish which, from the habit, is by some called the ruminant, as well as other fish. Long-limbed animals have loose feces, and broad-chested animals vomit with comparative facility, and these remarks are in a general way applicable to quadrupeds, birds, and men. 49b. A considerable number of birds change according to season the colour of their plumage and their note, as for instance the ousel becomes yellow instead of black, and its note gets altered, for in summer it has a musical note, and in winter a discordant chatter. The thrush also changes its colour. About the throat it is marked in winter with speckles like a starling, in summer distinctly spotted. However, it never alters its note. The nightingale, when the hills are taking on verdure, sings continually for 15 days and 15 nights. Afterwards it sings, but not continuously. As summer advances, it has a different song, not so varied as before, nor so deep, nor so intricately modulated, but simple. It also changes its color, and in Italy, about this season, it goes by a different name. It goes into hiding, and is consequently visible only for a brief period. The Erythacus, or red beast, and the so-called red start change into one another. The former is a winter bird, the latter a summer one, and the difference between them is practically limited to the coloration of their plumage. In the same way with the Becafico and the blackcap, these change into one another. The Becafico appears about autumn, and the blackcap as soon as autumn has ended. These birds also differ from one another only in color and note. That these birds, to a name, are one in reality is proved by the fact that at the period when the change is in progress, each one has been seen with the change as yet incomplete. It is not so very strange that in these cases there is a change in note and in plumage, for even the ringdove ceases to coo in winter, and recommences cooing when spring comes in. In winter, however, when fine weather has succeeded to very stormy weather, this bird has been known to give its cooing note, to the astonishment of such as were acquainted with its usual winter silence. As a general rule, birds sing most loudly and most diversely in the pairing season. The cuckoo changes its color, and its note is not clearly heard for a short time previous to its departure. It departs about the rising of the dog star, and it reappears from springtime to the rising of the dog star. At the rise of this star, the bird, called by some Enanthe, disappears and reappears when it is setting, thus keeping clear at one time of extreme cold and at another time of extreme heat. The hoopoe also changes its color and appearance, as Aeschylus has represented in the following lines. Quote, "The hoopoe, witness to his own distress, is clad by Zeus' invariable dress. Now a gay mountain bird with knightly crest, now in the white hawk's silver plumage dressed. For, timely changing on the hawk's white wing, he greets the apparition of the spring. Thus twofold form and colour are conferred, in youth and age, upon the selfsame bird. The spangled raiment marks his youthful days, the argent his maturity displays, and when the fields are yellow with ripe corn, again his parti-coloured plumes are worn. But evermore in sullen discontent he seeks the lonely hills in self-sought banishment." Close quote. Of birds, some take a dust bath by rolling in dust, some take a water bath, and some take neither the one bath nor the other. Birds that do not fly but keep on the ground take the dust bath, as for instance the hen, the partridge, the francolin, the crested lark, the pheasant. Some of the straight-taloned birds, and such as live on the banks of a river, in marshes or by the sea, take a water bath. Some birds take both the dust bath and the water bath, as for instance the pigeon and the sparrow. Of the crooked-taloned birds, the greater part take neither the one bath nor the other. So much for the ways of the above mentioned. But some birds have a peculiar habit of making a noise at their hinder quarters, as for instance the turtle-dove, and they make a violent movement of their tails at the same time that they produce this peculiar sound. And of Chapter 49b, and end of Book 9. Book 10 of History of Animals by Aristotle. Translated by Richard Cresswell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book the 10th. Erroneously ascribed to Aristotle. Chapter 1. If men and women, after they have reached a certain age, do not have children after cohabitation, the fault sometimes rests with both, and sometimes in only one of them. And first it is requisite to examine the uterus of the female, that if the fault lies there, it may be relieved by proper treatment. If the fault is not there, attention must be paid to some other cause of sterility. We may conclude that this organ is in a healthy state when, like the other parts of the body, it performs its functions without pain, and is free from fatigue after the function is performed. Just as the eye is in a healthy state if it suffers no pain in seeing, and is not disordered with the exercise of its function, or unable to perform it again, so the uterus is healthy which suffers no pain, and is well able to perform its functions, whatever they may be, and after they are performed is not impotent, but is free from fatigue. 2. The uterus is said to be disordered when, even if it performs its functions properly and without pain, it does not hinder its function by any part of itself. As there is nothing to prevent an eye from seeing accurately, although all its parts are not perfect, or if there happens to be a tumor in it, so the uterus may have received no injury in this respect if it is properly situated in the right place. In the first place, then, the healthy uterus will not be situated in this place or in that, but will always be in a similar position. But it is not difficult to decide whether it is not placed at too great a distance without suffering and pain, or whether it is devoid of sensation when touched. That these parts ought to be properly placed is evident from the following considerations. For if the uterus is not near, it will not be able to imbibe the semen, for the place from which it ought to receive it will be at too great a distance. If the uterus is near and not able to retire further, it will be useless, for it will be always touched so as to refuse to open. But it ought to do this and to be obedient to its function. These things ought to be thus ordered, and if they are not, the case requires attention. 3. The catamenia also should proceed correctly, that is, if the general health is good, they should last for their proper time, and not come irregularly. For when the catamenia are right, the uterus will open properly and receive the fluids of the body whenever they are secreted. But when they make their appearance too often, or not often enough, or irregularly, while the rest of the body does not sympathize with them, and the general health is good, we must look to the uterus for the cause of their irregularity. The dullness of the uterus prevents its being opened at the proper time, so that it receives but a small portion, or rather, the uterus imbibes the fluid from some inflammation of the parts, so that it shows that it requires attention, like the eyes, the bladder, the stomach, and other parts. For all the parts, when inflamed, imbibe the fluid which is secreted into each place, but not such a fluid, or in so great quantities. 4. In like manner, if the uterus secretes more than it ought to do, it exhibits an inflammatory tendency, if the secretion is regular but too abundant. But if the secretion is irregular, or more putrid than it should be in healthy subjects, the disease is then quite manifest, for it is necessary that some pain should show that all is not well. In a healthy subject, at the commencement and the cessation of menstruation, the secretion appears white and putrid. All those subjects in whom the secretion is more putrid than in healthy persons, or is irregular, or too abundant, or deficient, should receive attention, for this it is that prevents childbearing. But in those subjects who are only irregular and unequal in the periods of the secretion, the disease is not the preventive of childbearing, though it shows that the habit of the uterus is changeable, and does not always remain the same. And this affection is sufficient to prevent those persons from conception who are otherwise well disposed towards it. It is, however, hardly a disease, but an affection which may be restored without medical treatment, unless it is affected by some previous fault. 5. If the regularity and quantity of the discharge is subject to alteration, without any corresponding change in the rest of the body, which is sometimes in a more fluid, at other times in a more dry state, the uterus is not in fault, though it ought to follow the habit of the rest of the body and receive and secrete in proportion. If the body is in a good state of health, but undergoing a change, when this takes place, there is no need of medical treatment. But if the secretion is too small from disease, and the secretion is taken through some other source, the body suffers. And if the discharge is too great, from all the secretions of the body being turned in one direction, this does not point to disease of the uterus, but of the whole body. Whenever the catamenia coincide with the general habit of the body, it is evident that the fault does not lie with the uterus, which would perform its functions properly if the general health were correct. 6. Sometimes the uterus is weak and sometimes strong, sometimes too fluid and sometimes too dry, and the discharge coincides with the state of the body. It is abundant when that is full, deficient when it is less full. If the body is full of fluid, the discharge is watery. If the body is dry, it is more sanguineous. It begins with being white, like milk, and is without smell. Some are dark-colored, and when about to cease they become white at the last secretion. The white discharge has not the smell of putrid matter, but is more harsh and disagreeable, nor has it the smell of pus, and when this is the condition of the symptoms, there is no wearing away, but the body becomes heated. In all that are in this state, the uterus is in a healthy condition for childbearing. Chapter 2. We must then, first of all, inquire whether all these particulars are well ordered, and next we must learn the position of the body of the uterus, for it ought to be straight, and if it is not so, the seminal fluid can never reach it. And it is evident that women project their semen forwards, from what happens when they have lascivious dreams. For this part of them then requires attention, being moistened as though they had sexual intercourse, for they also project into the place where the semen of the male is emitted, and not into the uterus. And when projected to this place, the semen is drawn into the uterus by inhalation, as the mucus is drawn into the nose. For this reason, they become pregnant in every position, for the seminal fluid both in men and women is always projected forwards. But if it were projected into the female, she would not always conceive after copulation. 2. But if the uterus is not straight, but inclined to the hips, the loins, or the hypogastric region, it is impossible to conceive, for the before mentioned reason, that the uterus cannot take up the seminal fluid. If this deformity is great, either naturally or from disease, the disorder is incurable. If there is a rupture, either by nature or arising from the disease, which contracts the parts with inflammation, the disorder will take a different turn from this. But in order that women may become pregnant, it is necessary, as it was said, that the mouth of the uterus should be straight, and moreover should be well opened. By this I mean that when the menstrual discharge commences, the os uteri should on contact appear softer than before, though not distinctly expanded. But if this is the case, let the first appearance be white. 3. But when the appearances are more the colour of flesh, the uterus will be evidently relaxed without pain when it is touched, and the os uteri is neither dull nor different from itself. And when the discharge ceases, let the aperture be very open and dry, but not hard, for a day and a half or 2 days. For this shows that the uterus is in a healthy state and fit to perform its functions. If the os uteri is not immediately relaxed, but appears soft, it shows that both the uterus and the rest of the body are relaxed, and the uterus does not prevent, but first discharges the secretion from the os uteri. And when the rest of the body has discharged a great deal, and the os uteri becomes relaxed, it is a sign of a healthy condition. 4. And when the appearances cease to take place directly, the uterus shows that if there is any difficulty, it will become empty and dry, and wanting in moisture, and there will be no remains in the passage. When the uterus therefore is capable of contraction, it shows that it is in a proper state for receiving whatever is brought to it. When it is in this state without pain, and indeed is insensate, and it is good that the os uteri should not be in any other condition. This shows that there is no reason why it should not close at the proper time. This is the manner of considering the os uteri, whether it is in a healthy condition or not. Chapter 3. These ought to be the symptoms of the uterus itself after purification. First of all, that the woman should dream of sexual intercourse, and project her seminal fluid readily, as if a man were lying with her. And if this symptom occur frequently, it is better. And when she has risen, sometimes she should require the same treatment as if she had been with a man. Sometimes she should be dry, but this dryness should not be immediate, but after awaking she should be fluid, sooner or later, about as much as half a short day. The humidity should be of the same kind as if she had been with a man. For all this shows that the uterus is in a fit state to receive what is given it, and that the cotyledons are drawn up and will retain what they have received and be unwilling to part with it. 2. A flatulent state of the uterus is also a good sign, when it enlarges and discharges the wind as the bowels do without pain, and when it becomes larger and smaller without any symptom of disease. For these symptoms show that the uterus is not in want of what is necessary, nor sluggish, either naturally or from disease, but that it will be able to find room by growth for anything that it may receive, for it has the power of dilation. When this is not the case, the uterus is too thick, or some natural defect or disease has rendered it insensible. For this cause it cannot nourish, but it will destroy the embryo, if the symptoms are violent, while the embryo is small, if they are less so when it is larger. If the uterus is slightly affected, the offspring will be inferior, as if it had been fed in an inferior vessel. 3. Upon contact, the right and left side will be found to be alike, and all the other parts in the same way, and in the act of copulation, moisture will be produced, not frequently, nor in great abundance. This affection is, as it were, a perspiration of the place, like the saliva, which is frequently produced both in the use of food and in speaking. Tears also are shed from the eyes when we look upon brilliant objects, and under cold or greater heat, of which these parts also partake when they happen to be moist. So the uterus becomes moist when employed, when it is of a more moist disposition. Those that are in the best health suffer from this affection, for which reason women always require more or less attention, as also the mouth requires saliva. In some, this moisture is so abundant that they cannot imbibe the seminal fluid of the man in a state of purity, on account of its admixture with this uterine moisture. 4. Besides these affections, the following also is to be considered: whether, when they dream of sexual intercourse, their general health is good or not, as whether they are weak, and whether they are so always, or only sometimes, and whether they are not sometimes strong, and whether they are dry at first and moist afterwards, for this ought to be the condition of a woman capable of childbearing. For relaxation shows that the body has been profuse of the seminal fluid, and that it can perform its functions. But when the uterus is hard, it is a sign of debility. If a woman has this affection without any disease, it shows that the emission takes place naturally, as it ought to do. For if it were not so, there would be disease and prostration of strength. Sometimes, when the uterus is dry and afterwards becomes moist, it is a sign that the whole body receives and makes away with the seminal fluid, and that both the uterus and the body are strong. For it has been already observed that the uterus absorbs the semen which is placed upon it by the process of inhalation. For it is not emitted into it, but upon the same place as that of the man. All that takes by inhalation is accompanied with force, so that it is plain that the body of such a person must have the power of retraction. 5. It sometimes happens that women who have lascivious dreams, or men of strong passions, are robust not from strength but from health. This takes place when a large quantity of seminal fluid has been collected near the place from whence they emit it. If this makes its escape, they are in no ways debilitated, for they are not relaxed by the loss of a portion, if sufficient remains behind, or if that which was emitted was useless, nor if it was emitted easily, as if they parted with superfluous matter. For which reason such persons are not robust from strength but from dullness. But when any part is emitted which is necessary for the body, they become debilitated. 6. If a person is in good health and of a proper age, the seminal fluid is rapidly formed. This takes place in those that have not done growing, and in those that are grown. Women rarely know when they are first pregnant, for they do not think that they have conceived unless they perceive that the semen has been emitted, suspecting that it ought to be emitted at the same time both by the female and the male, and it escapes their notice, more especially when they think that they are unable to conceive, unless they have become dry, and that which they have received has disappeared entirely. But it sometimes happens that both the male and the female emit more than could possibly disappear, and more than enough for conception. When sufficient has been drawn in and much left out, they become pregnant without knowing it. 7. That it is possible that this should take place, and that the affection does not arise from the whole of the seminal fluid, we may learn from those animals which produce many young ones from a single act of intercourse, or from the case of twins produced by a single act. It is evident that they are not produced from the whole semen, but each place receives some portion of it, but the larger portion is left behind. And if many young are produced from a single act of intercourse, which appears to be the case with swine and with twins, it is evident that the semen cannot come from every part of the body, but it is divided out to each form. It is possible, therefore, that it may be separated from every part of the body, and that the whole may be divided among many, so that it is not possible that all should have every part. The female also projects her semen into the os uteri, where the man also emits his when he approaches her. From thence she imbibes with inhalation, as if it were with the mouth or nostrils. For whatever is not joined to the members is either hollow above and united by a symphysis, or is sucked in from this place by the act of inhalation. For which reason they take care that it should be dry, as if this had happened before. 8. The path along which it passes is thus formed in women. There is a tube enclosed in the body like the penis of the male. The inhalation takes place through this by a small passage above the passage for the urine. When, therefore, they desire sexual intercourse, this part is not in the same condition as it was before. A falling down takes place from this passage, and the forepart of the uterus becomes much larger than the part where it falls into this passage. This resembles the nostrils, for as the nostrils have a passage into the pharynx and into the external air, so this tube has a very small and narrow passage, like a passage out for the wind. That to the forepart of the uterus is wide and broad, as the nostrils are to the external air between the mouth and the pharynx. So women have a larger passage to the forepart of the uterus, and wider than the external passage. 9. Whatever conjecture is formed concerning these affections, it makes to the same conclusion, that the woman also emits a seminal fluid. The same things arise from the same cause, for to some it seems to be the cause of disease or of death, and these consider the end at the beginning as it ought to be considered. For to some women these are important causes, to some of no importance, and of these causes some are and some are not of consequence. They divide also in proportion the consequences which may result from them. To some it happens to pass through all these affections, to those who have many, through many of them, others through few, and others again who have none, through none of them. 10. There are some persons who suffer from the affection called inflation. This ought not to be. The affection is of this kind. In copulation they neither evidently emit semen, nor do they become pregnant. Wherefore they are said to be inflated. The excessive dryness of the uterus is the cause of this complaint, and when it has drawn the fluid into itself, it ejects it again. This becomes dried up, and having become small, falls out without any notice being taken of the circumstance on account of its size. When the uterus is violently affected in this way and becomes very dry, and ejects it very soon, it is plain that pregnancy cannot take place. If this does not take place very soon, impregnation appears for a time to have taken place until it is ejected. The same thing also takes place at times in those who have conceived properly. If a long time has elapsed, the uterus becomes elevated, so that it plainly appears as if impregnation had taken place until it falls out. Then all becomes as it was at first. They refer this affliction to a divine origin. It is curable unless it is natural, or the disease has gone a great way. It is a sign that this disease is not present when women appear neither to have emitted semen, nor to have conceived after sexual intercourse. Chapter 4. 1. Pregnancy is prevented also by spasm in the uterus. This complaint attacks the uterus when it is either distended with inflammation, or in the act of parturition. When any large quantity of matter suddenly enters it, and the os uteri is not open, spasm then arises from distension. It is a sign of the absence of spasm if the uterus does not appear to reach inflammation in its functions, whereas if spasm were present, there would be some signs of inflammation. Again, a swelling at the mouth of the uterus, if it is much drawn out, will prevent conception. It is a sign that this is not the case when the uterus appears to open and close properly after the discharge of the catamenia, or the use of the male. 2. In some also the os uteri is closed either from the period of birth or in consequence of disease. Sometimes this is curable and sometimes not so. It is not, however, difficult to ascertain the state of the case, for it is not possible either to receive or to emit anything in a proper manner. If it appears to have received and rejected the seminal fluid of the male, it is an evidence of the presence of the disease. But those who have no impediment in the way of conception, but are, as it has been said, as they ought to be, unless the man is impotent, or they are not able to have children together, being unable to emit their semen at the same time, and differ very much, such persons will have no children. Chapter 5. In order to understand of sterility in the male, we must take other symptoms. These will appear very easy if he copulates with other women, and impregnates them. When the sexes do not appear to concur with each other, although all the before mentioned circumstances are present, they do not have children together. For it is evident that this is the only reason of sterility. For if the woman contributes to the semen and generation, it is evident that both the sexes should be concurrent. For if the man is quick, and the woman slow in the emission of the semen, and many women are comparatively slow, this will prevent conception, for which cause they do not produce children by sexual union with each other. They do so, however, when they happen to be concurrent with each other. For if the woman is desirous and prepared for the intercourse, and is inclined for it, but the man is suffering previous pain and of a cold disposition, it is then also necessary that they should be concurrent. Chapter 6. It is quite plain when animals desire sexual intercourse, for the female pursues the male, as hens pursue the cock and place themselves beneath him, if the male is not desirous. Other animals also do the same. But if all animals appear to have these affections with respect to sexual intercourse, it is plain that the causes must be the same throughout. This bird, however, has not only the desire of receiving, but also of emitting semen. This is a proof of it. If the male is not present, she will emit the semen into herself and become pregnant and produce barren eggs, as if she desired both to emit semen, and when she had done so, soon ceased, just as when the male was present. Others also do the same, for a person has attempted to rear some singing locusts, which he had taken in a young state. When grown, they became pregnant spontaneously. 2. From these considerations, it is plain that every female contributes to the semen. If this appears to take place in any one class of animals, for the barren animal differs in no respect from the other, except that it does not produce an animal, and this because it was formed by the union of both sexes. For this reason, all the seminal fluid of the male does not appear to be productive, but some parts are barren, when not properly compounded from both sexes. And when women have lascivious dreams, the same affections of weakness and debility often occur, as if they had been lying with a male. It is plain, therefore, that if they appear to have emitted a seminal fluid in their dream, they will then conjecture that after their dream the same place will become moist, and they will be obliged to bestow the same attention upon themselves as if they had had sexual intercourse. So that it is evident that there must be an emission of semen from both if it is to be productive. 3. But the uterus does not emit its semen into itself, but on the outside into the place where that of the male also is received, and then draws it into itself. For some females produce spontaneously, as the bird produces barren eggs, and other females do not so, as the horses and sheep. Either because the bird projects her semen into the uterus, and the place upon which that of the male is emitted is not external, for which reason, if he does not copulate properly with the female, it is poured out upon the ground. But in quadrupeds there is another place for the reception of the semen, both of the male and female, which in other animals it is combined with other fluids of the body, and is not collected in the uterus, because it does not enter it. But in birds the uterus receives and matures the seminal fluid, and forms a body similar in other respects, though not a living creature. It is necessary, therefore, the living creature should be derived from both sexes. Chapter 7. We must inquire whether women speak the truth when they say that after a lascivious dream they find themselves dry. For it is plain that the uterus draws upwards. And if so, why do not females become pregnant spontaneously, since the male seminal fluid is drawn in, mixed with their own? And why do not she-goats draw that part of it which extends outwards? For this affection takes place in some that have been pregnant many years. For they produce what is called myle, an amorphous mass of flesh, a circumstance which has also happened to a certain woman. For having had sexual intercourse, and to all appearance conceived, the size of the uterus increased, and everything at first went on regularly. But when the time of parturition arrived, she produced nothing, nor did the enlargement become any smaller. But after 3 or 4 years a dysentery occurred, which placed her life in danger, when she produced a large mass of flesh, which they call myle. The affection continues in some to old age, even to the day of their death. 2. Does this affection arise from a warm habit of body, when the uterus is warm and dry, and for this reason capable of drawing into itself in such a manner that it is taken up and kept in it? For in persons so affected, if the seminal fluid of both sexes is not united, but, like the barren egg, is taken up by one sex, then the myle is produced, which is not a living creature, for it does not originate in both sexes, nor is it lifeless, for it is taken to have life like the barren egg. It remains, however, a long while, on account of the disposition of the uterus, and because the bird, which has produced many eggs in herself, when the uterus is stimulated by these, goes and lays them. And when the first is produced, the last will also come forth in proper time. For there is nothing to prevent it. But the body being productive, as soon as it is full, causes the uterus to be no longer retentive. But in viviparous animals, on account of the change of force, as the fetus increases and the diversity of food is required, the uterus causes parturition from a kind of inflammation. 3. But the flesh, because it is not alive, always requires the same kind of food, for it does not cause any weight in the uterus, nor any inflammation, so that the affection would continue in some cases throughout life, unless some fortunate debility should take place, as in the woman who was attacked with dysentery. But does this affection arise from warmth, as it was said, or rather from a fluid state, because there is a fullness as it closes, either because the uterus is neither cold enough to reject it, nor warm enough to bring it to maturity? Wherefore the disease lasts a long while, like those things which remain a long while before they are matured. But those that are about to come to maturity have an end, and that quickly. Such uteri, being very high up, cause a long delay, and again, not being alive, it does not cause any pain by its movements. For the movement of the ligament which the living fetus produces causes pain. And the hardness of the substance is the effect of imperfect production. For it is so hard that it cannot be cut by the stroke of an axe. All ripe and mature things become soft, but imperfectly digested things are immature and hard. 4. Wherefore many physicians, deceived by the resemblance, say that women are suffering from bile if they only see the abdomen elevated without dropsy, and a cessation of the catamenia when the disease has lasted for a long while. But this is not the case, for the bile is a rare disease. Sometimes there will be collections of cold and moist excrements and fluids, and sometimes of thick ones in this part of the abdomen, if either the nature or the habit is of this kind. For these things afford neither pain nor heat, on account of their cold nature. But if they increase more or less, they bring no other disease after them, but remain quiet, like some maimed thing. 5. The cessation of the catamenia takes place on account of the excrementitious matter of the body being directed to this point, as when women are nursing, for they occur either not at all or only in small quantities. A collection of matter from the flesh sometimes takes place between the uterus and the stomach, which has the character of the bile, but is not it. But it is not difficult to know the difference by touching the uterus, for if it is correctly placed and not enlarged, it is evident that the disease is not there. But if it is the same as when with child, it will be warm and cold and dry, because all the fluids are turned inwards, and the os uteri will be in the same condition as when they are pregnant. But if the enlargement is of any other kind, it will be cold and not dry when touched, and the os uteri will always be the same. End of Book 10 and end of History of Animals by Aristotle. Books 1 to 9, translated by Darcy Wentworth Thompson. Book 10, translated by Richard Cresswell. Proof listening and metacoordinating by David Craig. Read by Geoffrey Edwards in memory of my wife, Catherine Edwards, who said, "The best things in life are nearest."